Welcome, everybody, to this event. My name is Rich Foss. I am one of the board members of 350 Chicago, an affiliate chapter of 350.org, an organization co-founded by our speaker today, along with many other organizations. And I put together, along with some colleagues, these monthly speaking events for 350 Chicago. This is like our 15th, I believe we've had. We are a climate justice organization dedicated to fighting the climate crisis. We are a nonpartisan, non-for-profit 501(c) organization seeking to inform Chicagoans, Illinoisans, and people across the country about the climate crisis. I am joined tonight by my colleague Hannah Langhoff, who will be helping me with tonight's program. We meet at an extraordinary time in our country's history, which I'm sure I do not need to tell you. The current administration has cut funding for climate and sustainability work, taken down thousands of government scientific websites, and is doing all it can to stop the essential work of federal agencies, scientists, researchers, activists, all striving to end the climate crisis. Many of us here tonight have been engaged in this work for years, work to save not the planet, but life on the planet. If you are interested in becoming involved in 350 Chicago or our cousin organization, Third Act Illinois, which you hear about in a minute, I'm going to put a bunch of links into the chat in just a moment, and you can click on those links and get in touch with us. We look for a lot of help. One of the things that I always say in these talks is the more people we have, the more we can do. And there's been so many different times where I've been together with a committee and we've talked about, like, how about we do this? And it's like, oh man, if we only had 3 or 4 more people, we could really do this big thing that might make a difference. So I encourage you now more than ever to get involved, to donate money. If you think you don't have a skill or enough knowledge about climate or whatever, don't worry about it. You have a lot to give. I didn't think I did when I first started, and I've been able to do a lot here. So there's power in numbers. You can find news about 350 Chicago on all of the social media. We have our YouTube channel. Many of the past videos that we've done are on webinars we've done are on our YouTube channel. We've done things from topics on dealing with climate anxiety to the promise of enhanced geothermal energy that was the Department of Energy, to talking about CEJA, the Illinois Climate Equitable Jobs Act, which is a wonderful law. If you'd like to support our work with a monetary gift, you can help pay for the cost of doing the things that we do. You can do that in the chat as well. There'll be a link in the chat. So before we get to our speaker tonight, I'd just like to introduce from Third Act Illinois, Lori Bunkers, to say a few words. Lori.
Well, thanks, Rich, and welcome, everyone. Welcome especially to our guest speaker tonight, Bill McKibben. Bill, as some of you may know, is the founder of Third Act, an organization of experienced elders who are working to create a sustainable and equitable world for future generations. 2.5 years ago, a small group of dedicated activists in Chicago founded Third Act Illinois as a working group of Third Act National. Today, we have more than 400 members all across the state working to further our transition from fossil fuels to clean energy and to protect our democracy. As an organization, we believe in the strength of alliance, and most of our work is done in alliance with other environmental and justice organizations and Third Act National. With 350 Chicago, for example, we formed Climate Safe Pensions Illinois, a coalition of environmental organizations who are working to pass the Illinois Fossil Fuel Divestment Act. Leading up to the recent presidential election, we worked in partnership with Indivisible Chicago and other indivisible groups to call, canvass, and write postcards to voters in Wisconsin and Michigan, and post-election to push congressional leaders to do their jobs. On the Third Act National Costco Visa campaign, we collected signatures, met with store managers, and attended a stockholder meeting to encourage Costco to exert pressure on Citibank to divest from fossil fuels. And throughout the state, we support a variety of efforts to help ensure Illinois remains a leader in the transition to clean, equitable, affordable, and safe energy. But we're not all work and no play. We also believe in the strength of community, and we regularly seek opportunities to be together through virtual book club or Friday coffee and teas, sharing a meal, or exploring where we live. We know that being in community, whether it's in person or virtually like we are tonight, is critical to maintaining the strength, determination, and focus needed in this second age of Trump. So if you're an elder and interested in learning more, please email us or visit our website or Facebook page, which you'll find in the chat. We'd love to have you join us. But tonight, we're very happy and honored to be with Bill McKibben in this community. And thank you, 350, for bringing us all together.
Thanks, Lori. Okay, to our main event. Bill McKibben is among the other things that Lori mentioned. Bill McKibben is also the founder and senior advisor at 350.org and is the Schumann Distinguished Professor in Residence at Middlebury College in Vermont. He is 2014 recipient of the Right Livelihood Prize, sometimes called the alternate Nobel, and is a founding fellow of the Sanders Institute. Bill has written a dozen books about the environment, including his first, The End of Nature, published 25 years ago, and his most recent, Falter, Has the Human Game Begun to Play Itself Out? Thank you for being here, Bill. Take it away.
Thank you all so much for having me. I feel a little bit like Tom Sawyer in one of my favorite scenes from American literature, where he's assigned by his aunt to go and whitewash the fence and pretends to be having so much fun doing it that soon all the other boys in town are lined up to pay him a nickel to get to do some whitewashing themselves. I have a feeling that having founded 350 and Third Act, I've basically just made an awful lot of work for an awful lot of other people, and I'm extremely grateful for all of it. And I feel like I'm not going to be up to the task tonight, because I'm not sure anybody's up to the task right at the moment. I can't really offer you an explanation for precisely what's going on in our country right now. And I can't really offer you an exact way out of it, though I'm going to make a few suggestions. This is a extremely weird moment. I wrote a piece last week for the New Yorker, just sort of reflecting on the fact that on social media the day before, our president had declared himself a king and showed pictures of himself wearing a crown. I grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts, where the first battle of the American Revolution was fought. It had always seemed to me that if there was one single idea that undergirded American history, it was no kings. So I don't really pretend to understand exactly where we are, except that it's someplace dark and that we need to work and are working very hard to try to get out of it. And I'm extremely encouraged just to be watching the chat here today and see people chiming in from across the country, across the Prairie State, but also across the country, from 350 chapters and Third Act chapters in Colorado and California and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and New York and on and on and on. This is what we're going to need to do to mobilize around both the protection of our democracy and the protection of our planet. I'm going to focus on the planet tonight, and talk about where we are and what the possibilities are for taking on the climate crisis. I do that in part because I think that people are paying more attention right now correctly to the threats to our democracy, and that there's a lot of work going on in coalition with other groups like Indivisible and so on and so forth to turn people out to be places. We've been sponsoring lots of letter writing to representatives' campaigns at Third Act. There's a lot more of that going on. Stay tuned. But I want to describe where we stand right now with climate change and climate politics, and suggest that this may be one very fruitful place to go on offense against the oligarchs. And we have to play a lot of defense, and we will, but we also need some ways to figure out how to take this game to them. So let's start first just with a quick update about where we stand on the climate crisis. It'll come as no huge shock to any of you to know that we're in a bad place there too. I did write the first book about all of this back in the 1980s, and I think really the years that I was thinking about as I wrote it were probably turn out to have been 2023 and 2024, because the temperature, which had been on a steady upward ramp for 4 decades, spiked very sharply over the last 24 months. And we don't 1,000% understand the details of why, other than it's more or less what happens when you pour this much carbon and methane into the atmosphere. Beginning in 2023, we noticed first a very sharp uptick in sea surface temperatures. And by May of that year, we were recording the highest temperatures we'd ever recorded in the ocean. A series of buoys off the Keys in Florida were routinely registering 101 degrees, which is more or less the temperature at where you set your hot tub at. By June of 2023, that heat had moved decisively over land. We're able to take a daily average temperature reading for the whole planet now every day, because we got enough satellites and buoys and weather stations. And the temperature is always highest on our planet around the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, because there's more land mass up here and that holds the heat. Those days around the solstice in June of July of 2023 were, the scientists told us, the hottest days ever recorded on this planet. The records go back at best a couple of hundred years, but scientists are good at developing proxies in glacial cores, ocean sediments. They were confidently saying that these were at least the hottest days in the last 125,000 years. And that hot streak has continued pretty much every month since June of 2023, has set new records. The hottest March, the hottest October. January 2025 was the hottest January we've ever measured on this Earth. With that rise in temperature, of course, has come all the things that one would expect. We're seeing tremendous damage now to basic fundamental systems on this planet. The jet stream is no longer working the way that it always has, and that's because as we've melted the Arctic, there's not the same temperature differential between the poles and the equator, and that gets the jet stream stuck in these strange patterns. And the Gulf Stream, the big Atlantic currents, which are enormous, 100 times the volume of the Amazon River, are now beginning to flicker and fade too, because there's so much fresh water pouring off of Greenland as it melts in the North Atlantic. These are extremely, extremely dangerous and big things that are going on. And we're also, of course, seeing very dramatic things right around us. If you wanted one fact to understand this century, it would be that warm air holds more water vapor than cold. You get more evaporation, then more drought. And if it's hot enough, eventually there'll be a fire. We got to watch the horrific blazes in Los Angeles at the beginning of this year, the home of my first boyhood memories in Altadena burned to the ground on day 2 or day 3 of that conflagration. Um, um, but of course, those aren't the first or the only fires. 2023, you'll recall the smoke pluming down from Canada. The boreal forest burned at such incredible volume that in 2023, Canada trailed only the US, China, and India as the biggest carbon emitter on the planet, even though it only has 30 million people. There was just so much carbon pouring out of those burning forests. Once that water's up in the air, it's going to come down. It comes down in deluge and flood. Vermont, where I live, has been hard hit. We've my small town now seems to get routinely cut off for a week or two from the world because our highway, our 2-lane road in and out of town washes out when the river rises. But California, Vermont, we still have enough money for the moment, at least while FEMA still exists, to dig out of the worst of this. That's not true in the rest of the world. In 2023, when the rain stopped in New England, it picked up in North Africa, where they had their biggest rainstorms of all time, the kind of rain you can only have on a globally warmed planet. In Libya, the rain was so bad that on the main river, it washed out 2 dams, and then that river roared into a coastal city and swept 10,000 people out to sea, where they drowned in the course of an hour. Bodies were washing up 150 kilometers down the coastline. We didn't really read much about it because it happened in Africa, and no one pays that much attention. But we should. All of Africa has only put about 3% of all the greenhouse gases that are up there in the atmosphere. The 3% of us who live in the US have put about 25% of them up there. This isn't just a practical problem, it's a deep moral problem. And it's getting much worse. We're on the path at the moment to increase the temperature about 3 degrees Celsius by the time people who are now young or my age. 5 or 6 degrees Celsius. If that happens, we will not have civilizations like the ones we're used to. Just to give you one example, the UN estimates that'd be enough to produce between 1 and 3 billion climate refugees, people who have to leave their home because their home's underwater or on fire, or you can't raise food there anymore. We've seen what 1 million refugees on our southern border has done to wreck our politics. Multiply that by 1,000 and try to imagine the world in which we live. So our job is not to stop global warming, too late for that. It's to stop it as short of the place where it cuts civilization off at the knees. And if we're to do that, we have to move very quickly. The IPCC has told us that if we want to have any hope of staying on anything that looks like that Paris pathway, we need to cut emissions in half by 2030, which by my watch is 4 years and 10 months away. So not a huge amount of time to do what needs doing, especially given the prevailing political conditions in our country. That's the bad news. And I don't make any attempt to sugarcoat it or pretend that it's not bad. It is. We're in a extremely difficult place, more difficult than humans have perhaps found themselves in before. That said, there's another sense in which I'm more optimistic, at least about our possibilities, than I have been at any time since I wrote The End of Nature. And that's because of the next story I want to tell you, which is about something that's happening in almost Hollywood fashion at exactly the same time, which is the rapid rise of clean energy around this planet. Engineers have really done their job. Over the last 10 or 15 years, they've dropped the price of energy from the sun and the wind and the batteries to store that energy when the sun goes down or the wind drops. They've dropped the price of those things about 90%. Sometime about 4 or 5 years ago, we crossed some invisible line where it became cheaper to produce power from the sun, catching its rays on photovoltaic panels, or taking advantage of the fact that it differentially heats the earth, producing the wind that turned those turbines. We crossed the line where that became cheaper than burning coal or oil or gas, which is a huge deal. We live on a planet where the cheapest way to make power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That's an epic change in the human condition. If we're able to take really advantage of it fast, then we have, I think, the one possible route out of the worst of the climate crisis. To give you an example, California is the one state in this country that's really, done a lot of what it should in order to build up its renewable energy. And they've reached the point where there's enough solar panels and enough batteries and enough wind turbines that last year they crossed some kind of threshold. For most of the year, California was producing more than 100% of its electricity for long stretches of every day from renewable energy. At night, when the sun went down, the main source of supply to the grid on many nights were those batteries that had been soaking up excess sunshine all afternoon. Those batteries didn't even exist on that grid 3 or 4 years ago. That's how fast this is happening. But here's the bottom line from that. California in 2024 used 25% less natural gas to produce its electricity than it did in 2023. In 1 year, it reduced its usage of gas for electricity by 25%. That is a big enough number. That's the most encouraging statistic in the 40 years that I've been working on this. It's a big enough number that applied around the world, it would begin to take a serious bite out of that 3 degrees Celsius. And it can be applied around the world. The red state of Texas is now putting up renewable energy faster even than California. Even though it's also the hydrocarbon hub of the planet, the economics of this are extraordinary enough that that's what's happening there. The story from 2024 that really knocks me out, and I have all these close to hand because I just turned in the manuscript for a book called, with apologies to George Harrison, Here Comes the Sun, that will be out in August or September of this year. In Pakistan last year, because Pakistan has an unreliable electricity supply and an expensive one, and because it's right next to China, so it was easy for importers to start bringing over the cheap Chinese solar panels that are now produced in abundance in their factories. In Pakistan last year, electricity demand began dropping on the national grid, and no one could figure out why until researchers went on Google Earth and just saw that in Karachi and Lahore and Islamabad, people were putting up solar panels everywhere. Tops of factories, apartment buildings, malls, you name it. Before the year was out, Pakistanis had put up in solar panels the equivalent of about 50% of the country's national electric grid in 1 year. Farmers, those of you who've traveled in rural Asia, know that the soundtrack of rural regions is the sound of diesel generators powering pumps that for the irrigation wells, the tube wells that were the result of the Green Revolution in the 60s and 70s. But that diesel's pretty expensive. Farmers were the early adopters of these solar panels. Often they lacked the funds to build the steel supports for the panels, so instead they've just been laying them on the ground, pointing towards the sun. Pakistan used 35% less diesel fuel last year than they did in 2023. Again, that's a big number. It's a big change. If we can make this happen fast around the world, then we've got some kind of chance. And so I'm going to talk about how we make it happen fast. And I mean, there's many, many answers to that question, but an important one at this point has a lot to do with kind of raising consciousness about where we are. Because I think not many people, even people who really care about this stuff, maybe even people on this call, quite understand just how much the underlying economics and possibilities have changed over the last few years. We've spent my entire lifetime referring to sun and wind as alternative energy, as if it was kind of the, I don't know, sort of the Whole Foods of energy, nice, but pricey. It's not. It's the Costco of energy. It's cheap. It's available in bulk. It's on the shelf. It's ready to go. If we can get that message through, then we have some chance of affecting policy enough to make big shifts happen. Those of you in Illinois have really played a big part in this, and you've begun to see what can happen. Illinois, and I think probably you know the situation better than I, but it feels like Governor Pritzker deserves some real credit here, have passed, among other things, a really innovative solar siting law that makes it much easier to build solar farms and things. I spent a few days in July or August out in the fields of Illinois, near in the townships surrounding Rockford, and talking with guys who were setting up solar farms in lots of places. And it was completely interesting to meet the local people who had become big and ardent advocates of this work, union leaders who liked the jobs, people who were working with inmates out of prison who were happy for the chance to be trained in this work, Habitat for Humanity leaders who were very happy to be producing houses that had lower cost energy, on and on and on. And it was really amazing just to be reminded of how possible this is. I was standing one day with a guy who was developing one of these, an old friend of mine who was developing one of these smaller solar fields. And he was driving a Ford F-150 Lightning, which is the EV, the electric version of the most popular pickup, the most popular vehicle in America. And we were standing next to a cornfield. He said, now, if you take an acre of this field and use it to grow ethanol, which is what roughly half the corn in Illinois is used for, it's a big gasoline growing state there on that beautiful, rich topsoil. If you take an acre and use it to grow corn that you turn into ethanol, and then you put it into a Ford F-150 conventional truck, it gets about 25,000 miles. So not nothing, but, if you cover that same acre with solar panels and take the electrons and put them into the electric version of the Ford F-150, you don't get 25,000 miles, you get about 700,000 miles. That's how much more efficient these solar panels are. And it's a reminder that we have everything that we need to get done what we need doing. And that if we did this, and this is the place where I really want to just hammer this home for a minute, if we did this, then we would begin to break the political power that comes from the fossil fuel barons around us. sun and wind energy are fundamentally different from fossil energy, not just because they're cleaner and don't wreck the climate, though that's a very nice thing, but because also they're, instead of being concentrated in a small number of places, they're diffuse, spread everywhere. Everybody has some. And what that means is that you no longer have the kind of control, concentration of wealth that goes with fossil fuel. Think about who the biggest fossil fuel players in the world have been. In America, the biggest of all were the Koch brothers. They own more pipeline and refining capacity than anyone else. They used their winnings to degrade and erode our democracy. If you want to really know who to thank for what's happening right now in our country, they deserve an enormous share of the credit, of the blame, because they've been hard at work on it for a long time. In Europe, it's Vladimir Putin who's taken his hydrocarbon winnings and used them to launch a land war in Europe in the 21st century, something that we're decided now disgracefully to assist and abet. It would be much nicer in every way to run a planet on sun and wind. Much nicer unless you own an oil well or a coal mine, in which case it's an extraordinary threat, which is precisely why the fossil fuel industry poured $500 million, almost $455 million, into the last election campaign. They were the biggest players. And they did it because if Donald Trump said to them, if you get me $1 billion, then I'll give you anything you want. Well, they got him $500 million, and he's going to give them everything they want. And breaking that hold is really important. It's a different world if we can get on the other side of this. A different world because once you've got a solar panel up, then the sun delivers the energy for free. And that's exactly the opposite of how the world's worked our whole life. The reason the Rockefellers got so rich was because you have to pay them every month for another shipment of oil. And the world on the other side of that is much, much, much more liberated, which is a beautiful prospect, I think. So, in order to try and get this across, in order to play some offense, in order to get under the skin of the oligarchs, one of the things that we're going to do in September of this year, September 20th and 21st, is have a big weekend of action. We're calling it, we haven't officially launched it yet, but you guys, have been hearing about it, and I want to give you the kind of latest details. We're calling it Sun Day, not Earth Day, but Sun Day. And it's going to be, in many ways, a remarkable celebration of the possibilities and a positive vision for where we can be going, along with a certain amount of anger at the people who are preventing us from getting there. Imagine a day filled with parades of EVs and e-bikes and e-buses. Imagine every house in America that already has solar panels on top putting a green light out that night to tell everybody what they've got going on. Imagine the concerts and rallies and possibilities. And imagine people everywhere across the country figuring out all the things that would work in their neighborhoods. Imagine people who have homes with heat pumps, opening them up for tours so their neighbors can see how they're effectively heating their homes, on and on and on. And imagine a weekend filled with with art and music of all kinds. Rich, I think you've got a couple of slides, and really, those slides are not that important. I just want people to see the logo that we're using. So maybe the first slide, and then we'll just flip through quickly to the last couple. This logo, if you can, when we get it up, is half a sun. And that's to symbolize the fact that we're halfway there. We have the technology that we need. Now we need the political will to fully implement it. There we go. You can see the half a sun. Now just flip through a couple of pictures of old Earth Day there from 1900. You can flip through these. I've already talked about all this stuff, but the next, those are Earth Day 1970, and I put them in just to remind us what's possible when we do things like this. Earth Day in 1970 was the biggest protest in American history. 20 million people, about 10% of the then American population, pouring into the streets. The next one shows Fifth Avenue in New York, I think. And that was enough, even with a corrupt Republican president, to get us the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the EPA, all the things they're trying to get rid of now, 55 years later. And so we're going to try and recapture some tiny fraction of that magic with this first Sunday. If you show the next slide, there's the logo. And one of the very first tasks, even before we launch, that would be super useful would be if people would go to sunday.earth. That's the website, sunday.earth, and use the simple drawing program there to give us your own image of the sun. And if you hit the next one, Rich, you'll see some of the ones that people have done already. And we just need thousands and thousands of these images when we launch. You'll see some more if you go to that sunday.earth website and contribute your own and get your kids and your grandkids and your neighbors and whatever to do the same, and give us your name so we know who it's from, and make sure that we're in touch about all the details. Look, I do not promise you that any of this is going to win the day. We don't know. We're in a difficult, we're in a very, very hard place now. The physics of all of this is dire, and the politics of it is really tough. But I think it's pretty clear that this is the one way out that we have. It's not a perfect way out. You have to go mine some lithium and cobalt and things. But as it turns out, you have to do endlessly less mining than we're doing at the present for the fossil fuel system. The latest numbers I saw indicated you could mine all the minerals that we need for this transition between now and 2050, and their volume would be less than the amount of coal we mined last year. So the shift is remarkable. If we can rely on that huge ball of burning gas 93 million miles up there in the sky that we now have the wit to make full use of. I think that Americans may be ready for a joyful, positive vision about a project that we can cooperate on together. I'm an old person, which is fine by me. There's days I've got to say when I'm quite happy that I'm an old person now. But that means that I can remember the last big project like this that we undertook as a nation, and that was to reach the moon in the 1960s. And even in that period of chaos and division, it was a unifying and quite beautiful project. This is like that, except instead of landing two people on another planet, we have to bring our star down to this Earth and use it to protect all the beauty and integrity and meaning of this place that we've been lucky enough to be born onto. And it's a great privilege to get to do that work and to get to do it together with you in Third Act and in 350.org and in all the other people that we get to work with all over the place. It's really, really powerful to get to be with you all in those ways.